I'm going to start recording. Let me go back for a second. One more time. All right. Just going to start from the beginning. I'm not going to say everything over again, but we'll just put these up again. For R's. All right, so the most important thing here, of course, would be the metabolism part of it, right? Getting energy and using energy. Getting and using energy. So today we're going to specifically talk about getting energy from the sun, because that's the basis of all life on the planet, is plants. All right, so photosynthesis, it's a process by which an organism uses energy from the sun to produce its own food. All right, so energy has to come from somewhere. Energy doesn't magically appear. It has to come from somewhere. And in this case, it's coming from the sun. The sun, by the way, is producing the energy by burning fuel. You know, so how did the fuel get there? I would say it was created by God that way. All stars are doing that, burning fuel. So now we're going to see our leaf. That's our spinach leaf right there. And the light is providing the energy. And it's taking carbon dioxide from the atmosphere, water from its roots, and it's converting it into carbohydrates and oxygen. Carbohydrates would be glucose, C6H12O6. Oxygen would be O2. All right, so y'all all know photosynthesis. You studied it before. Did anybody write the equation on your quiz? Get extra points for that. All right. And I'll have that formula for you here in just a minute. So what are we using for our energy? So when we eat our energy that came ultimately from the sun and the plants right there, we're going to be utilizing 3 different macronutrients. Those are carbohydrates, proteins, and fats, or also known as lipids. All right, so what do these look like? So that's our macronutrients. Our carbohydrates include anything with the carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, like a C6H12O6, which is glucose. So this particular thing right here, the one on the left, the long chain right here, every time you see a cross mark, so see the carbon right there? Every cross mark right here is also another carbon. So that's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 carbons, and then I'm thinking it's, 12 H's and C6H12O6, so we're having a carbon right there, I think. So that would be considered a simple sugar. Sometimes those sugars will form what is known as an aromatic ring. It joins together to make a ring like that. Typically you would study that in something called organic chemistry, where these aromatic rings come out. So typically when we're looking at glucose being formed from photosynthesis, we draw it like that right there. A long chain of hydrocarbons, and those are carbohydrates. All right, you see carbon and hydrogen in there. So namely, if I say, what is a carbohydrate, you're going to tell me it's sugar. All right, so where do we get our carbohydrates? Where do we get our sugars from?
Bread.
Say again?
Bread.
Bread, yeah. So if you name any plant, because the plants are making them, right? They're making carbs. So we get carbohydrates from spinach. Okay, so have you heard people say carbs are bad for you? Yeah. Well, it depends on what kind of carb it is. All right, so the carbs you get from your vegetables and some fruits, those are the good carbs. You can eat as many of those as you want. Our problem comes in when we get those breads and pastas and things like that, those complex carbs that tend to have a little too much for us. Okay, proteins. I think you have 2 blanks, proteins and amino acids, right? So proteins are long chains of amino acids. So amino acids are therefore the building blocks of proteins. So chains of amino acids are proteins, and amino acids are the building blocks of proteins, which include hormones in our tissues. Some of the most important hormones in our body, namely insulin. Insulin is the hormone that's produced in your pancreas that's causing all of your glucose to go into your muscles so you can move. That is a long protein. DNA is a long protein. Okay, so there's several different kinds of proteins, and they're made up of amino acids. So in my younger science classes, I give the kids out like M&Ms of different colors, and you line them up in a certain way, and that's going to make a protein. And so for that protein to be assembled exactly properly, it has to have a code to tell you which comes red, blue, blue, green, yellow, 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 red, that kind of thing. That is coded by DNA. So we kind of think of our DNA as being the thing that made you look the way you look. Brown eyes, brown hair, this kind of thing, how tall I am, right? So we think of it that it's working every single day in your body. It breaks open and it makes new proteins by coding for amino acids that will turn into a long protein like insulin. All right? Lipids are fats. We use fats for storage. We store stuff in our fats, so it's useful to us. People used to say if you eat a lot of fat in your diet, you're going to get fat. Well, we've decided that's not exactly true. That if we eat healthy fats, they're really good for us. Avocados, name them. Best fat around. The fats that are bad for us are McDonald's, Starbucks. Sorry, the processed stuff, the junk. I like Starbucks. All right, so we store that in the fat in our body. It's also stored in oils from plants. For instance, avocado is a plant, yeah? Did y'all know that do y'all ever use avocado oil?
Yes.
Do you know that comes from the actual avocado? That's unusual. Most, they come from the leaves or the stem or something like this. It comes from the actual flesh of the avocado. They squeeze it somehow and get oil out of it. And it's really great for cooking because it has a high smoke point. Okay, our nucleic acids, these are going to be the basic information included in DNA. There are 4 base pairs in DNA. There are 4 base pairs in RNA, one being different than the others. Our base pairs are adenine, guanine, cytosine, and thymine. And A always bonds to G, and C always bonds to A always bonds to T, and C always bonds to C. G always bonds to C. A and T, G and C. The different one in RNA, instead of a thymine, it has a uracil. So that's the difference between RNA and DNA. We have RNA in our body too. So do plants. Okay, so let's get back, not quite, to autotrophs and heterotrophs. Autotrophs make their own food. So autotrophs are essentially plants, but there are some other things out there that can make their own food. They're weird types of bacteria living at the bottom of the ocean, in fact, that make that without the sun, they actually go through a process called chemosynthesis, very similar to photosynthesis. Instead of using light for their energy source, they use chemicals for their energy source. But they're autotrophs. Autotrophs make their own food. Heterotrophs must consume their food. So our little picture right here, the plants on the left are our autotrophs, and the little bunny that's eating the carrot is our heterotroph. We know all these words. So we're back to photosynthesis. This is the formula for photosynthesis. Okay, the process that gives life from the energy from the sun. And we have carbon dioxide plus water with the energy of sun making sugar and oxygen. And so that formula right there, 6CO2 6CO2 plus 6H2O yields C6, H12, O6 plus 6O2. All right. So plants need CO2 and they make oxygen. We need oxygen and we make CO2. So it's a beautiful symbiotic relationship going on right there. So when you eat, like I have a salad for lunch today, therefore I have a bunch of leaves in there. So the leaves have glucose. So I'll be eating glucose right from my leaves. Can I talk you into that a piece of lettuce has a sweetness to it? A little sweet? Not as sweet as pineapple, of course, but there's sweetness, yeah? I'm trying to think of a vegetable that tastes really sweet.
Corn?
Oh yeah, corn.
Corn's a fruit then.
No, it's actually a grain. It's a vegetable.
Oh, that's right.
Just don't.
No, I take that back.
Because it has
It's a
little
grain.
seeds in it.
If we're eating the seeds, we're eating the fruit. Corn's a weird one, but it is sweet. Celery, do you think celery's sweet?
Some are.
Yeah, some of it's better than others. All right, so here we go. Here's our plant. It's got something inside the leaf. The stuff it has is called chlorophyll. Chlorophyll happens to be green. It just happened, God just picked it. I don't know if it was just arbitrary or what, but he just picked green. He could have picked pink, but he picked green. Every plant is green. There's only one I know of that's not. It's called the Indian pipe brush, not paintbrush. Indian pipe brush. It's white. It doesn't do photosynthesis, but it has roots. So therefore, it's got plant parts, but it also acts a little bit like a fungus. Okay, so the chlorophyll is green. It's taking the energy to make food. It needs water. It needs CO2. It needs energy from the sun. It gives off O2, oxygen, and of course, they're saying here starch. Starch is a long chain of glucose. So some things have more starch than others. Potato, for instance, has more starch than other things. Sweet potato has a lot of starch in there. Now, what is the plant? Why is the plant making glucose? Who's it making it for?
The consumers, right?
It's actually making it for itself. It's making the food for itself. So at nighttime when there's no sun shining, guess what the plant needs? It needs its nutrients. And it gets it from wherever it stored it. If it's a carrot, it's storing it in the root. It's a carrot. If it's celery, it's storing it in the stem. If it's spinach, it's storing it in the leaves. Okay? Eventually there'll be a flower made and seeds made and this kind of thing. But it's making it for itself. But what we do is we cut it down and we eat it, right? So we take it for ourselves. But that's okay. God made that deal with us. All right. We have aquatic plants that we'll be looking at. Well, we have some green stuff in the ocean, y'all. Green stuff in the ocean. They're either plants, which are kind of few and far between, really. Think about like seaweed isn't a plant. Did you know that? Seaweed's not a plant. It's a algae, right? So we have algae, which are these right here, which are not plants. They don't have. They go through photosynthesis, and we'll go through this in a lot of detail coming up in a future module here. Notice this one over here says it's red. Red algae. Yeah, it's green, but it also has some red in it. You ever seen purple cabbage? Yeah, I love purple cabbage. It's green. It just has
the weird
also
lettuce
purple.
with the purple veins in it.
Yep. It's
Leaves
also
are
green.
but
You can actually get the purple out of it and see the green right behind. Then we have our algae, but they're photosynthetic and they're aquatic. So this does not show any of the aquatic plants. We have grasses. There's seagrass. I'm trying to think of something else. Seagrass grows underwater. Very few plants in the ocean. Mostly we're looking at algae. All right, respiration is the opposite of photosynthesis. This is what we are doing. It's also what the plant's doing at night. Okay? So we take the glucose from the plant. There's my salad. I'm breathing. This is why we need to breathe. Okay? Then when I exhale, I'm breathing out CO2 and water. Water's coming out. That's why my hand's wet. Right there. And energy. It goes through what is known as the Krebs cycle. Do you remember the Krebs cycle from Biology 1? Remember that? The Krebs cycle. It should, Krebs, K-R-E-B-S, Krebs. It's named after Dr. Krebs. Dr. Krebs, I think, it had S on his name. Usually when you hear Krebs cycle, you should get a little scared. Not the Krebs cycle. All right, because it's tough. When I was in college, I was given a blank piece of paper and said, write the Krebs cycle. Ay, ay, ay. Lots of steps, a big circle, and then we're going to see where each one of those little bonds is broken. So what happens is this carbon and this hydrogen and oxygen, all those bonds get broken, and every time a bond is broken, guess what I get? I get a little bit of energy and a little bit of energy, right? And so at the end, notice all of my carbons and all of my oxygens and all of my hydrogens are in the stuff I'm breathing off. CO2 and H2, I just get rid of those. I just get rid of them. So how in the world did I get energy breaking all those bonds? It goes through this thing called electron transport system and ends up giving me 36 ATP molecules, which is a lot of energy. So as long as I'm eating and breathing, I'll produce energy. So don't forget to eat and breathe. All right, there's our energy in the form of adenosine triphosphate, ATP. A beautiful balance. So we have our glucose and our oxygen, respiration making CO2 and H2O, my CO2 and H2O with energy from the sun, photosynthesis making C6H12O6 and O2. Okay, beautiful balance. The most beautiful symbiotic relationship on the planet. Right there, us and plants. We need plants. What you may not know is that the vast majority, you're going to see maybe in your book, but I watched a couple of videos, right? I was trying to put some videos in here, and they were all so bad with the whole evolution thing. I just couldn't do it. But what I wanted to see there was, it was talking about how that, the opposite, these two opposite things right here would have that energy stored, energy released thing. Okay? And the vast majority, I'm going to say about 84% of the oxygen we're breathing is coming from aquatic, marine, sea life. So we're talking to algae. Algae. We think, don't cut down the forest. I'm not saying cut down the forest. I don't want to cut down the forest. I want to leave the forest. I love trees. But the vast majority of our oxygen is not coming from trees. It's coming from algae in the ocean. That's why really what we need to do is take care of our oceans. Okay? Fortunately, the oceans are huge. And out there in the middle of the ocean, there's nobody there to wreck stuff. Unless we throw our trash in the ocean and it makes that gyre and all that business, right? So we've got to be careful there. So working together, this is just showing you once again, here we have our sun creating our energy for our animal to eat, who's giving back. So it's a big cycle going on right there. So the one way is photosynthesis, the other one is called respiration. So when I say the word respiration, does it make you think about breathing? Respiration, a respiratory therapist, right?
Yeah.
Right, so think about the O2 part of it, right? The oxygen part of it. That's what's happening with us. All right, how does the ocean fit in? It provides a majority of oxygen via photosynthesis, diatoms, something called dinoflagellates. I actually have dinoflagellates living at my house right now. And I'm going to bring them to y'all because they're the kind of dinoflagellates that go through something called bioluminescence. So they glow. All right, prokaryotic cells. You're going to draw this. Now, y'all know I'm a microbiologist, so I really like prokaryotes. I love bacteria. Most of them are beneficial. I will tell you that the number of bacteria that we're going to study in marine biology are very scant. There's not a lot of bacteria we're going to deal with, okay? So we don't care so much about bacteria when it comes to marine biology. Regular biology, we look at it quite with a lot of detail. My biology classes, if you remember that, we actually worked with bacteria and put them on a plate, all that kind of stuff. So you're just going to draw this. What we want to know about prokaryotic cells, they're single-celled organisms. They live alone, mostly. There are some that, they form colonies with a whole bunch of other ones, but they themselves are independent. So prokaryotic cells are single-celled organisms. They don't have any organelles. And the way that I have my students say it is they don't have a nucleus. The DNA is just floating around inside of it freely. And a few other things floating around. Ribosomes. Ribosomes are how they make protein, by the way. We have a little special kind of a DNA here called a plasmid. So we say chromosome, it's just the DNA. This shows a flagellum right here. It's just a little tail. Some of them have it. Not all of them have that. But what bacteria are trying to do, of course, is to have reproduction, and they just split into two. So if one bacteria becomes two, it just splits itself in half, called binary fission. So y'all are just going to draw a single cell. Looks a little bit like a hot tamale.
We need to label them, right?
And just, label. Here's what I want you to label. DNA. If you want to say capsule, the thing around the outside is the capsule. Notice it says here, or slime layer. Some of them are slimy. Not all of them. They're slimy so they can stick to stuff like your throat and make you sick. But you have some living in your throat right now that are keeping you from getting sick. Yay. The good guys.
You said DNA?
It's DNA floating around in there, yeah.
And then the capsule, and then...
You can put the flagellum if you want. Mostly what I want you to know is they're single-celled organisms. They're single-celled. There are some eukaryotes that also can be single-celled organisms, but the ones we'll mostly be studying are the multicellular ones. All right, we have a drawing in there?
if you want to call it that.
Now these might be, I think, hold off on drawing these real quick. Let me just tell you a couple things about eukaryotic cells. We have plant cells and animal cells. Typically to draw a plant cell as a square because plants have cell walls. Animal cells do not have cell walls. They have cell membranes but not cell walls. So we usually draw animal cells circular and plant cells square to just remind ourselves that there is a cell wall. So we were working with spinach today. The spinach is a plant, it has a cell wall, so if you looked at it in a microscope, it would look like little squares there. So what I want you to do here is draw something more like this. Okay, so that would be an animal cell. You could draw it round. You can draw it square if you want to. Okay, and what do you need to know about this one? It has a nucleus. What's inside the nucleus and always stays inside the nucleus? Always, always, always. It's DNA. The DNA is in the nucleus all the time. Never comes out unless the cell's been destroyed. It's bad for this DNA to come out of the nucleus of the cell. There is something that comes out in and out of the nucleus cell. It's RNA, ribonucleic acid, and that's how it enters into the nucleus, makes the copy of the DNA, comes back out, makes the protein out there. And it has all this stuff. Who took biology with me and we made the cookie? We made a big old cookie. Remember, we had all the candy on the cookie. Like our hot tamales were our mitochondria. And I had bubble gum as our Golgi apparatus, stuff like that. So different organelles. They're called membrane-bound organelles. And I think the most important, I would say, would be our mitochondria. That's where the ATP is made. That's where the Krebs cycle takes place, is inside the mitochondrion. That's singular. Mitochondria is plural. We have the Golgi complex or Golgi apparatus. We have the endoplasmic reticulum, smooth and rough. This shows an animal cell with flagellum. That's odd. It's strange. There are not many flagellated eukaryotes.
What
Yes.
were you saying you wanted us to label?
I want you to know that there's a nucleus, DNA's in the nucleus, and a mitochondria produces the energy. The stuff that's floating around in the gel is called cytoplasm. That's a good one, cytoplasm. Think of it like a Jell-O salad with stuff floating around in there. Oh, we're on 2A, yeah? Oh gosh, okay, we gotta move on, y'all, gotta move on. All right, living systems. Here we're talking about the organization of living things. We have the smallest part of it is an atom, which joins to become a bigger thing called a molecule or a compound. And those form organelles. The organelles come together to form cells. We're talking about eukaryotes at this point. The cells come together to form tissues. The tissues form organs. Organs form organ systems. The organ systems form organisms. All right, so populations that live together are called a community, and all the physical features and land formations of the environment make up something called the ecosystem. So we're going to be specifically looking at an ecosystem that is in the ocean, right? It's in the ocean. We're looking at salt water, we're looking at depths, we're looking at the temperature of the water, the salinity of the water, these kinds of things. All right, this, y'all, yikes. On that bottom of page 20, is that 20?
Yeah.
Yeah. So you're just gonna, the top one's gonna say atom, and the atom is the smallest unit of element. Then comes our molecule, cell, or just what I just described to you. But you're gonna write these things down. I'm just gonna let you write those. And perhaps I'll run and go get our experiment. If you want to take a picture of that whole slide, I'm okay with that. Also, keep in mind, all of this is in the book, and I shall return momentarily. slide, is everybody doing okay? I'll put it back up here if y'all are not finished with this. Okay, but the next slide we're going to look at and try to explain what's going on with our lab. All right, so this is a picture of a leaf. So if we're looking at like our spinach leaf right here, you may have noticed this on plants that the top of the leaf is usually darker green than the bottom of the leaf. You ever notice that? Okay, and that's because the vast majority of the cells with chlorophyll have been packed up onto the top right here, called the epidermis right here, and they're all packed together, and then we have this called palisade mesophyll right in here. But look underneath that, the spongy mesophyll. So really what happens underneath there, if you think about it, even our spinach leaf, if you squish it, it's a little spongy. Now you've noticed some other leaves that are more spongy, like let's think of a succulent plant, really spongy, right? Some other plants have thicker leaves that are really spongy. Well, what's happening down the spongy part of it right here is there's the gas exchange. All right, so they're making O2 and they're sending it out. They're pulling CO2 in through these little holes called the stoma or the stomata. Stoma just means hole. And it's just open and stuff's coming into it. CO2 is coming into it. O2 is going out of it. If water will come out of it too. Have you ever stood under a tree and you feel like a mist of water on you? Specifically, what is it? The crepe myrtle? You ever been on crepe myrtle and you'll get wet. Big drops of water will come out of it. They're coming out of the stoma of the leaves. Okay, unless we're in a drought, in which case the plant's going to keep as much of its water as it can. But that's why standing under a copse of trees in the summertime is more comfortable than standing under a pole barn, because there's a very fine mist of water coming out over you. And it's coming out through those little holes right there when they have extra water. But mostly those holes are to allow CO2 in, O2 out. So what we were doing now was we were providing CO2 to some of our leaf punch things and withholding it from other ones, right? So the ones that had the CO2 with them, remember that was our cup that had a plus mark on it? And the CO2 was in there because I put in some baking soda and it provided the CO2 instead of it coming from the air. We sucked all, when we used the syringe to suck all the air out of it at the beginning, and I told you bubbles were coming out, we were taking out any of the gases that were in the spongy mesophyll. That's what we were doing when we did that, okay? So now when I put it out there, when it starts to undergo photosynthesis because it's being exposed to the light, guess what it's going to start making again? Okay, it's going to bring in CO2. Where did it get the CO2 from? Our cup, right? And it's going to release what?
Oxygen.
Into the water, okay? So now what we're going to do, y'all, is we're going to take a look at your cups. Now, I'm missing a cup for some reason. Maybe it was pretty windy out there, so wind could have knocked it over. Furthermore, I'm not super happy with our amount of sun that we had. It was a little overcast and that kind of thing. So our lab may not have worked as well as I liked it, but it looks like it did okay. Okay, so we're looking, this is our lab portion right here. I'm going to put the light on and I'm going to turn this off.